So welcome, as Asgham said, I'm with the Graduate School of Public Service here at NYU, and we are a School of Management, Planning, and Policy, three areas that are very important in the topic that we're discussing this morning. But enough about me. I want to have you get to know our panelists a little bit better, and in the interest of time this morning, during their introduction, I'd like them to go into basically what got them interested in the sustainability field. What was that moment that first made them realize that this was an exciting thing that they were passionate about? And then kind of talk about, in addition to what drew them to this work, perhaps how their role has changed over the years. So why don't we just go down the road, and we'll start with you, Constantine.
Sure. Thank you, Jane. And thank you to Asgham and John and everyone from NYU for pulling this together. There's been a lot of great work happening around sustainability at NYU. NYU's certainly been a university leader in the field, and it's nice to kind of see this come together for the students. My role in all of this is very much from the research side, as well as kind of developing education programs here at NYU that focus in some way that bring in the elements of sustainability. So I'm Deputy Director of NYU's new Center for Urban Science and Progress, which is a new school, essentially graduate school at NYU that came out of Mayor Bloomberg's Applied Sciences Initiative. And what we're doing is really using big data and data science techniques and applying those to the problems of cities and of people who live in cities. So this is a field that we're calling urban informatics and urban science, and it's very much how we could use this type of analytics to improve the efficiency and resilience and quality of life more generally in cities. So all the things that we normally associate with sustainability. I've also created here at NYU, actually at the Real Estate Institute, a center called the Center for the Sustainable Built Environment, which actually initially about 3 or 4 years ago when we started, got some seed funding from NYU's Green Grant program to get us going. So that was actually very helpful initially in the process. And that really focuses on how do we make kind of the market make better decisions about sustainability? Because in the end, a lot of this is going to come down to the people who are making the decisions. And making the decisions are usually people who are controlling the money. So the value proposition and understanding the motivations and the incentives and how people make those decisions is a key aspect of how we're going to improve the adoption and proliferation of sustainable practices. And I'm also a professor in the Civil and Urban Engineering Department at Poly. So cover this from a number of different grounds. How I got into this, for me, there was no switch that said, oh, I'm going to start doing sustainability. My undergrad was in systems engineering, and in systems engineering, you just focus on making things more efficient and understanding how different systems work together and interact. And that's very much a kind of the concept behind sustainability. Especially now and in cities, it's how does the natural and the physical and the human systems, and the social systems, how do they relate to one another? And how do you kind of improve the functioning of one system, understanding its implications and interactions with the other systems? So that was kind of the start. And then kind of from there, I went into my PhDs in urban planning and economics and actually studied with 2 professors at Columbia who were, borderline Marxist in terms of their views. So that gave me a very healthy dose of understanding issues of social equity and social justice. And in between, I actually got a degree here at NYU in real estate finance. So I'm a very conflicted individual, tying these ideas of how do you make money with, how do you have a concern about social equity and justice, and in the meantime, what are the technological solutions that get you there? But I think that background just kind of logically pushed me into an awareness and an understanding that the decisions we make and the investment decisions we make, the choices we make, have very significant ramifications on the social side, and in particular on the environmental side and their impacts. So I think it was really much, just kind of this natural kind of progression. I spent a little time, actually quite a while, where I started my own real estate development company, and actually had the opportunity to really kind of make these decisions for myself. And actually come through those very, very challenging and difficult decisions where you have to decide, do you spend the extra money to be more efficient, or spend the extra money to use the low VOC carpet tiles, or do you not? And it's understanding how those decisions are made, I think, is going to be very critical for all of you as you go forward, and what the trade-offs and the balances are.
Thank you, Chris.
Good morning. I came to this in a slightly different fashion. I run an organization called Solar One, and we run a standalone solar power building over in East River at 23rd Street. And we started the organization back in about the end of 2004. And the organization is primarily focused on environmental education with programs for what we call K through Gray, which is basically anybody. We have programs in the schools, we have programs for commercial and residential building owners, tenants, industry, whatever it happens to be. I came to this because I actually have a different route. I went to law school and practiced law for many years here in New York City. In the late 1980s, I moved out to California and practiced law out there for a while. And I got tired of practicing law and tried a new career, and I got involved in technology consulting and did that for a while, and decided to take a year off and spent some time coming back here and thinking about what I wanted to do full time. And for most of my life, I'd cut my teeth on doing volunteer work as a staff member, or board member, whatever it happened to be. And I did a lot of stuff in the LGBT community, the AIDS community, HIV community, and did that, in the anti-war movement in the 1970s, and did a lot of that work, and knew that that's where my passion was. That's what I liked doing. That's what I was really good at. And so I decided it was time for me to move back to New York. And the day I saw my house in San Francisco, I saw this job posting on Craigslist for starting this organization in New York City, sort of getting on the ground floor kind of thing. So I moved back, I applied for the job, and I got it. And so that was at the end of 2004, and we've built a pretty good organization over the last couple of years. We're now about 30 people, and we have offices in 3 different locations around the city. Most of our education staff works out of the Solar One building on the East River, but the rest of us work on 26th Street. We have a workforce training lab over in Long Island City. So we have a lot of different programs going on. And I think, part of this is about passion, what you bring to it. And I will say truthfully, when I left San Francisco, my environmental commitment was really about recycling and composting and all that kind of stuff. And there really wasn't a whole lot of interest. I had done some commercial litigation involving the closure of some landfills in California, and that was about the extent of my involvement in the environmental community. But I knew when I moved back here that I wanted to take a job either in the LGBT community, HIV/AIDS community, or in the environmental community. And this one popped up, and my interest in it started with my taking this job, quite frankly. And I will say that it's built over the last 7 or 8 years, and now I feel like it's a very important and passionate piece of my life right now. So it's become part of the fabric of my life, and much to dismay of all the people around me. But I do think that there are a lot of ways, and we'll be talking about this, about how you can take a career and move from practicing law to something else, to running a nonprofit organization, which oddly enough takes pretty much every skill that I've ever had and learned, whether it's negotiating a lease, whether it's dealing with a contract somewhere, whether it's dealing with some policy issues, dealing with public speaking, whatever it happens to be. All those things that I did in my past have all come up and caught up with me. So I think that was a great training ground for getting the job where I am today.
Hi, I'm Nancy Marks. Unlike Chris, I never got tired of practicing law, and I've spent the last 30 years as a litigator, suing polluters in the government, all but 2 of those years with NRDC, which is a national environmental group, and I spent 2 years working for a state attorney general in Massachusetts. And but it was sort of a circuitous route. I'm a child of the 60s, like you, I guess, and when I was young, the things that turned me on, environment was probably about number 5 on the list. We were all exercised about the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the women's movement. And but we grew up as activists. I grew up in Queens, now the hot borough. We were joking about that before. And but then when I went to school, I decided to study science, and I was a geology major, and I went to graduate school in geology, and I really loved that, but something was missing. And I dropped out and sort of spent a couple years, as a carpenter on a pig farm, and sort of wandered in Bolinas, California, in my mid-20s, and just thinking about the world and what I wanted my place to be in it. And at some point, I just decided that I wanted to be a public interest environmental lawyer. I'm not sure where that came from. I had worked in a national park that had been sort of saved by the Sierra Club, but I don't really think that was it. And for some reason, that idea took root, and I went to law school for the purpose of being a public interest environmental lawyer, and it is what I've been for all these years. And after 30 years as a lawyer, I make less than a first-year associate in a New York law firm, and I wouldn't trade places with those folks for all the money in the world. And the other thing I also co-direct the Environmental Law Clinic at NYU, which is really fun. But the other thing I've learned over these years is that all those passions of my youth, social justice, environmental justice, political justice, are all related to environmental justice. And that has been one of the most rewarding parts of my career, is to sort of remake those connections in the work I do with on behalf of communities or behalf of smaller groups that we represent. And so that's just been, fantastic. And, one day I woke up, I just said, I'm a lifer. And there's, I'll do it until I get tired of being a lawyer, which I don't know when that'll be, but not for a little while. So that's my story.
Thank you.
Well, this is actually really fascinating, because these are all people I work with, or maybe I work with their organization, and I did not know any of these stories. So this is very exciting. I actually studied music in college, and one day I was flying home on a winter break, and we were flying over the Midwest, and I looked down from the plane, and you can see how in the Midwest, where the entire country for like thousands of miles is all split up into little squares, and you can see them from the air, and even the rivers go like right angles, like in between the squares, and it just went on for like hours. It was like most of a continent, and I was like, holy moly, because you don't curse at 30,000 feet, and I was like, we just own this world. We just own it, and we're maybe not doing the right things with it, and we maybe need to do something better with it. And so I switched my major to engineering with a specific focus on the environment. And after college, some friends and I from school did something that seemed really obvious at the time, which was to decide to build our own little town, or village that would really show people how to live environmentally, because our belief was that the tools to live a more sustainable lifestyle were out there. This was the early 90s, but we already had composting and recycling and solar panels and all of these not so radical ideas, but there was no one really doing it, or at least there was no one doing it all in the same place, and sort of putting all the pieces together and saying, here's what a fulfilling but sustainable life could look like. So we actually bought land out in the country, and we moved there, and we started a new village. It's actually still there. I'm actually on the board of directors. That's sort of my second job, and it's about 75 people, and we've recently done sort of eco audits and found that the people who live there have a eco footprint about 90% less than the average American in terms of electricity and water and fuel and miles driven. And so that's really showing, that's sort of the limits of what's possible. And I was there for about 15 years, and it was great because sort of like your experience on the pig farm, you get to work with your hands, you really get to do things, you get to build something and see it standing there, which is nice. But I had always wanted to come and live in New York. I was born here. And John asked me whether, instead of asking 40 people to shut off the lights to save energy, whether I wanted to come to NYU and ask 40,000 people to shut off the lights to save energy. And I did. And that was great, because it was interesting the ways in which some of the basic concepts were very similar, in that you try to get people to move one step beyond where they are right then. That's really all that most people can do, is move one step. But it was fun to do it on a much larger scale. It was like 1,000 times larger. And I was here at NYU for 5 years, and it was great. And once again, I felt like I was, really doing things and getting to see like the tangible results of our efforts. And then I was approached by Urban Green, where I work now, basically with a pitch of like, well, it's great you get to tell 40,000 people to turn off the lights, but how about telling 8 million people to turn off the lights? That sounds really good, doesn't it? And it did. So I went there, and I had just actually been there a few months when we were hit by Sandy, and our group had been asked by the city to lead a green codes task force previously that proposed building code improvements to help make the city greener, and we were asked to lead a building resiliency task force after Sandy to sort of do the same thing for building resiliency. And so in both cases, I work very closely with the mayor's office and also with the city council now to get these these laws passed that help make our city greener. And we are really seeing change. I mean, that's the exciting thing. I think it's a very exciting field to be in because we are going to see the changes in our lifetime. In fact, I was actually just telling someone who works here this morning, for the past several years, this is sort of the week of the year where I become the only cyclist on the road again. It gets cold and everyone goes away, and finally I have the bike lane, all to myself again, or on the bridge. It's just me and there's not traffic. Well, not this year. Like this year, even when it got cold, the bike lanes are full and the bridge is full. And that's a change that's just happened, in the past 5 years. And when we say, hey, there's got to be radical change if we're going to save the world, if we're going to cut our carbon 90%, in the next 40 years, and people say, well, that's impossible. You'd have to build an entire, solar power plant, every 6 days for the next 30 years for that to happen. It does sound like a lot. And I just think about, setting like the time machine back to 1995 and saying, in 15 years, every person in the U.S. will have, a cell phone in their hand. And someone would say, that's impossible. You'd have to sell like 20 cell phones a second for the next 15 years. You can't do that. They cost $9,000. Well, it's like, you just wait. Or even better yet, going back to like 1885 and looking out at the streets of New York filled with horses and saying in 30 years, every one of these horses will be gone. And people saying that's impossible. How would people get around and bring things to market and get to work? We can't do it without horses. So I'm very excited about the next 30 years and what will happen to cars and what will happen to coal plants. And you all are the ones that get to make that happen. And I think it's a great time to be in the movement.
Thank you for sharing a little bit of your past and kind of how you came to this work. You already have started to kind of touch on the next question, Cecil, which is looking towards the future. What are the trends that each of you might see happening in the area of sustainability, in particular as it relates to the nonprofit sector? So you've already talked about changes in bicyclists and usage that way. And do any of the others of you have any trends that you want to share with the audience?
Okay. I'll start. I'm not sure if this is necessarily specific to the nonprofit sector. I mean, I think I see that, obviously the proliferation of information is going to be a key aspect. I mean, it's obviously going to be redefining how we live as a society. We're already starting to see that. But I think particularly in its impact on sustainability will be the most dramatic. And I'll give you, I think, a couple of examples. But I think the basis and the context for all of this, I think we're at a point where there's been a lot of incredible work done, but to really meet these targets that everybody's talking about, 2020, 2030, we're nowhere near on the trajectory to do that. I think a challenge for many of you out there is that in some cases we've been very effective. People have been very effective, like the people on this table have been very effective at getting people to do the things that we all really should have been doing but maybe hadn't been thinking about. The challenge now is getting to the deeper dives and really getting to kind of deeper levels, not only of environmental sustainability, but also the very difficult questions around social equity and justice. But I think that the fundamental issue here is that sustainability is inherently a measurement problem. I think the challenge has been that we just are not able yet to measure and quantify the things that really matter to all of us. The issues of energy in buildings, for example. The reality is that a typical commercial building in New York City rents for about $100 a square foot. It might spend $3 to $4 a square foot a year on energy. So if you save 50% energy in that building, $2 a year is not going to make a huge difference to that landlord or that tenant. But at the same time, that same building is probably spending $800 to $1,000 a square foot on its employees. So if you can make those employees 5% more productive, 1% healthier, so they miss 1 or 2 days, don't miss 1 or 2 days of work, that's going to have a tremendous, tremendous impact. So we really need to start focusing on the things and measuring the things that make people healthy and happy, which make people productive, which means it's going to have that monetary kind of that value proposition that people will understand, so we could really get the uptake that we need in a much more quick way to do this. And I think I'll just touch on a quick example. So I've been doing, since 2010 or so, the New York City came out in 2009 with Local Law 84, part of the Greener Greater Buildings Plan, which is collecting energy and water data for large buildings in New York City. And of course, U.S. Green Building Council is very involved with that. I'm sure Cecil had a hand at some fashion in all of that as well. And so we've been doing, they approached me early on to do all the data analytics behind it and help kind of make sense of what all this information meant. So we've been putting out reports, we've been doing other work on this, but the underlying kind of premise is that by providing people information about how much whatever they're using, in this case energy or water, and then allowing them to compare that to other people, I mean, this is a very effective tool, not around just peer pressure, because peer pressure only works as long as the pressure is applied. As soon as the pressure goes away or your norms change, then you don't really care anymore. But you could create competitive markets around things. And that's what this type of data is doing on energy. It's creating a competitive market around energy efficiency so that landlords and tenants are much more concerned about this because they think it's going to have an effect on their bottom line. And in the end, and we don't all like to admit it, but that's going to be a primary motivation for not the front end leaders, the people like you in the audience, people like here on the panel, but at, kind of that next group in that classic diffusion curve is really going to be motivated by the bottom line. How does that affect the things that matter to them? And you see, to really get to scale, we need to get past the people who are just believe in this the way most of us kind of believe in this, and get to the things that really matter to them in terms of how they make decisions and what motivates them.
I kind of think that there are a couple of trends that I think are happening. One is there's been a proliferation of nonprofit groups over the last 6-7 years focused on the environment. And at some point, there'll have to be some sort of consolidation of those groups. There's just too many to support. And my own organization included, I'm sure. But I do think that that's something we're going to have to be looking at. The other thing is that if we've gone through a very, very deep recession, and we're coming out of it, and we're still talking about this stuff. And I think that's a really hopeful sign that this is here to stay, that energy is something that we use all the time, and we have to figure out how to get it right. There's lots of careers in energy, and there will be. It's not going away, no matter how we do it, whether we do it with solar or we do it with fossil fuels or whatever we do, it's going to be here. The other thing is also it's a more troubling part of the whole equation, and that's the whole social justice piece of this thing. I was out at a high school yesterday, the High School for Energy and Technology, and the students there, it's a new school. It's the second year, so they're 9th and 10th grades. And the focus of the school is on HVAC systems. And one of our, Jonna is here, and she was one of our educators there last year and helped get that program off the ground. They had wonderful things to say about you. And one of the things that occurred to me as I was going through this tour and we were bringing a funder through was they have a program there that's working with, really, really kids who don't have the same kind of chances kids have in other schools. Huge special needs population, twice the size of pretty much any other school in the city. And they're getting HVAC training using standard HVAC equipment. And I was out in Milwaukee at Johnson Controls a year ago and saw the technology that Johnson Controls has for building management systems and technologies. And these kids are being trained, and they're being trained in what we know now, what we have now. They're not being trained in the stuff that's coming down the pipe in the future. So all this technology that Johnson Controls has is going to be in buildings going forward is stuff they're not learning about because they don't have access to that equipment. They don't have access to the computers, the technologies, the systems, any of that stuff for them to get trained on. And that's a huge problem. It's not a problem we haven't experienced before as a country. But I think that's a piece that we have to keep kind of front and center, is how do we bring the rest of the community along in this movement in a real concrete way. And we have to sort of pay attention to it all the time. We can't let it go and sit back in the back burner.
Just going to say two quick things. The first is that, you know, I'm in a very narrow corner of this world, which is sort of the legal world. And, you know, I work for a traditional national environmental group, but I have to say that my work over the last 5 or 10 years has really changed. And now I'm litigating about things like mold in public housing and, you know, things that, and I have a relative I don't like very much who said, that's not environmental. And I was like, hell, it's not. You know, it's sort of the essence of, I mean, what is more the environment, you know, and then the home you live in and whether you can breathe. And so I see that even, you know, at NRDC, the way we think about the environment and things are changing so fast and there's so much bigger and more global and more dire than they were when we all started in these careers 30 years ago. And so we're thinking about ways that we can use the law to address these larger and more intractable problems. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, like everyone else up here, I guess, I spend a lot of time talking to students and meeting students. And I'm just blown away by the number of young people I've met in the last few years who are saying, you know, how can I do this work? And there's just so much energy. And a lot of them are sort of worried about, you know, will I be able to find a job? And I just think this field is just going to be exploding. And a lot of the explosion, I think, is going to be in the private sector, you know, with energy and everything. And I tell students, I speak mostly to law students, and, you know, they're saying, oh, I'll never find a job at NRDC. And you know, there's so many new kinds of organizations that are forming to take care of, you know, they aren't thinking about things like not only how do you create renewable energy, but how do you transmit it and how do you get it to people? And these are all new fields where there's going to be a tremendous amount of investment and innovation. And so I'm very heartened to see this sort of next generation coming up that's going to, you know, it's a real cultural shift, I think, because when I was young, nobody was thinking about this stuff. So I'm very heartened by that.
Thank you, Nancy. So before opening up for questions from the audience, perhaps each of you as panelists can kind of share a piece of advice that you would have for people that are interested in getting into the field of sustainability, or perhaps a specific skill or set of skills that people really need to develop if they're interested in having a productive career in sustainability and nonprofit, or just sustainability more generally.
You start.
Okay. Well, obviously, I mean, I think it's important to you know, to do something that you enjoy, because I think it'd do a better job if you're really passionate about it. And it's not just a job. That said, there's an interesting thing where we've all seen the articles about how in the U.S. the need for science and technology people, there's this huge gap, and people say, we want jobs, there's no jobs. It's like, did you read the article about how we need, maybe it's time. And so there is a need for engineers, or it doesn't just have to be engineering, you know, in that term, but for the people that are going to get out there and sort of do all the things that Nancy said. I mean, we're going to be transforming our energy grid. We're going to be transforming our buildings. We're going to be transforming, you know, our means of transport. All these things need people that have the skills to do that. And I would say lots of the skills are learned on the job. There are a few jobs for which you need to have the right degree, and maybe law is one. It's hard to be a lawyer without a law degree. But you don't necessarily need a degree in transportation planning or building science to end up in a green field working on making the changes in those fields. Lots of those things are skills you learn on the job, or you learn during, you know, your ongoing education while you have that job.
I guess my first piece of advice would be, you know, follow your heart and don't do what people what you think you should be doing, because it's a long career and you've got to get up every morning and go to work, and you want to really love what you do and the people you're doing it with. And I would echo your advice. There's just so many different skills that are needed, and technical skills, economics. We have folks who are going to get sort of public interest MBAs. There are just so many ways to approach this, and you have to be willing to take some risks. And maybe take jobs that are sort of less secure, or they're for 6 months, and you kind of, I see so many kids who, and older people too, who have sort of gone someplace with a kind of shaky little job and just shown that they're smart, they're dedicated, they're committed, and they've always found a way and found a path. So sometimes you have to take risks. Oh, you have your own.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think about a guy who came in to SolarOne's building back in 2007, and he had spent 3 months out at the Solar Living Institute in California doing an internship. And he was about 26 years old, I guess, 25 years old, and he said, it just happened that day one of our educators had decided to go back to school and announced that he was going to be leaving. And this guy walked into my shop, and he said, do you have anything that you want me to do? He said, I'll work as an intern. He said, I just want to get involved with doing solar in New York City. I'd been three months in California working at the Solar Living Institute. And I said, how would you like to be an educator? And he said, sure, I'll do whatever it takes. And he rolled up his sleeves, and he had no experience in education. But he became one of the best teachers we had. And from there, went on and started doing a lot of our outreach programming, and started a festival we called City Soul for many years. We had over at our site was kind of the old EcoFest festivals, but we sort of updated and focused on renewables and energy efficiency and electric vehicles and all that kind of stuff. And before long, he went back to the Gallatin School and got his did an independent study on exhibits and sustainability and all that kind of stuff. And he sort of worked his way through our programs, and he became one of the most charismatic people in the organization that we had. And really, really was incredibly smart and dedicated. And he came to me about 3 years ago and said, look, I've gotten this job offer. And it was the only I told him he could never leave. He had to stay with the organization forever. But it was the only job I could let him take, and that was he was hired to go do microfinancing projects in India and Pakistan. And so he's lived there for the last 3 years doing those kinds of projects and learning project management skills that she never really had. So he's coming back sometime next year, and who knows where he'll land. But it's an interesting path for him. Someone who now is 35 years old, has a family, and is raising them in India right now, but will be coming back and kind of he really kind of has whatever he wants to do. He'll be able to do it. And he has he has a master's degree, having gotten that degree at the Gallatin School, but he's really progressed in a way that the world's kind of his oyster right now, and he's incredibly passionate about it. So I guess what I'm saying is there's lots of paths to take and lots of entry points, and I would say get into whatever area you want to get into, just get into whatever way you can, whether it's doing fiscal work, or whether it's writing a brief, or doing some research, or whatever it happens to be, and just soak up as much experience as you can, and then sort of go with your instincts and follow your path and figure out where you want to land.
Thanks. Two thoughts. I mean, the first, so I've developed a couple graduate programs here at NYU focusing on these types of issues, and I'll just kind of echo and emphasize the science and technology piece with really a focus on take at least 1 or 2 statistics courses in whatever program you're in, understand math, understand some of the science behind climate change. These are just core. We're at just broadly speaking, we're at an inflection point in our ability to measure and understand the world in which we live and how we live in it. And I think this is going to be a key point in how we change things going forward, and a key aspect. And I think that you need the technical knowledge coupled with the passion. I get a sense that activism is starting to change in a way. right? That activism is really now, it's technology driven, it's driven by fact, it's driven by data. So you need that passion, you need to be able to reach a lot of people and convince them, but people want convincing in a logical fashion. So I think the ability to do both of those, to understand what's going on, understand what data and information means, how to communicate that to people effectively is going to be a key aspect of how effective you guys are in making a difference going forward. The other thing I'll say is be very open-minded in understanding other people's perspectives. There's a lot of I get a sense that there's a lot of us versus them in the sustainability world. It's the people who bike versus the people who drive, the people who only eat local food for the people who go to McDonald's. Now, understand that people aren't necessarily making those decisions just because they're bad people, right? I mean, people have different motivations, different realities, different constraints in their lives. So you really need to understand kind of what's going on and what's driving people, different people. I'm really gotta have an empathy for what's going on. A lot of people I got my start kind of doing sustainability, if you will, here at the Shack Institute of Real Estate, in a real estate program, teaching a lot of young guys who wanted to grow up and be Donald Trump. And people would say, well, why are you teaching sustainability there? And it's like, well, that's the one place you want to do it. Because if I convince the people who will be building and managing the buildings that they should be worried about and the environment, or worried about social and corporate responsibility, you can have a tremendous impact. So you just need to understand that, how people are approaching this, and then, what kind of triggers are going to make them change their behavior at the end of the day, and kind of get us all where we hope we get to go.
Thank you. I don't know if any of you in the audience, I think we have time for one or two questions that you may have been pondering as you've been listening to our panelists.
Sustainability advocates, if you happen to have a student job on campus, volunteer for that. There's a Green Grant program. There's tons of volunteer opportunities where you can understand the sustainability energy concepts. If you go for an interview, they don't want you to design lighting. They want you to know that incandescent, fluorescent, and LEDs, like which is more efficient. It's simple terms. If you sit there and you don't know that term, you're not going to get that job. So take advantage, whatever school you're from, what's going on campus. Go onto your sustainability website. There's a ton of activity. And what we're looking to do in the Office of Sustainability at NYU is, we get the same 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 people out of a 40,000 person community coming back to the website. We're trying to expand that. So look what opportunities you have on campus, and you can leave with your degree and some sustainability experience.
Thanks. So do we have any questions from the audience? I don't know if they have a microphone, so just stand where you are and we'll repeat the question for the AV.
It's early.
Very early, exactly. No questions. Okay. Any of you have expertise in apparel and manufacturing?
It's obviously not.
Huh? Be brave, Chris. Supply chain, come on, you can do
Sort of.
it.
I mean, it's kind of like what's trending, and I think fashion. Two things. One is fashion can be a vehicle in which to promote and get people thinking about this stuff differently. And I think, in some ways, there's been some of that. You have some high-profile celebrities in the fashion world who are green, and that for a while actually was very apparent. And there were a lot of places you could go. Lauren Bush does the feed bag social cause. There's a whole bunch of different celebrities that focus on a lot of that stuff. On the resourcing side, I don't know a lot about it, but I would sort of look at, everything from, how cosmetics are made to where the raw materials are coming from, what kinds of raw materials are being used, all that kind of stuff. Because I do think that, again, it's going to be a question of money. And if you can make fashion accessible and affordable and make it sustainably designed and processed, you have the same argument that you can make in buildings that you can make in the fashion industry. And I think it's being done, but you just don't see a lot of it. But there are definitely a lot of fashion designers who are out there who are designing sustainable clothing and all that kind of stuff.
And also, I actually just got an invite to some sort of green fashion event or something like that. If you want to give me your email after the event, I can forward that to you.
There's also an organization called the Broadway Green Alliance that deals with the theater industry, getting them to go green, not only the sets, but the costumes, design, the theater itself.
Okay, and there's a question in the back here. It will be our last question.
I'll just take a quick shot at that. I mean, yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge now has been the greenwashing piece. People co-opting this term for marketing and other purposes. And part of this challenge is that we keep this term green is very ambiguous, and we have to put it in quotes sometimes, as Chris did, because we don't really know it's all the time what it means. I think not to harp on this, but I think what we're seeing is, especially with CSR policies, we're starting to see a lot more reporting and auditing that's done. So measurement and kind of transparency is going to be just a key element here. So we need to, I think a lot of these companies that are really on the front end of this are starting to measure and report a lot of the metrics that we might be concerned about, and then making that available to people so we could all ask questions of it and really challenge it. And I think that's the only way you're going to get from the anecdotal kind of, people making kind of superficial claims to really being able to have a good discussion and debate about what all of this means.
Okay, well, I want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for spending time with us this morning and sharing their experiences and their projections for the future. And with that, I will turn it over to John or Ozgam for our next panel. Thank you very much.